Former American President Donald Trump and current American leader Joe Biden won even more votes from party delegates in the March 19 primary elections, aiming for a rematch in November. Politicians have won in Arizona, Illinois, Kansas, and Ohio. Trump also won the Republican primaries in Florida, where Democrats do not hold primary elections. In Ohio, Illinois, and Florida, former South Carolina governor and former presidential candidate Nikki Haley still won a significant portion of the Republican vote, despite no longer participating in the election race, but remained on the ballot. The president and former president of the United States of America have already gained enough delegates to be nominated by their parties for the post of head of state, and most of their competitors have dropped out of the race. The candidates are focusing on campaigning in swing states where they will need to win the general election in November. In recent days, Biden has visited Arizona and Nevada, where he hopes to gain the support of young and Latino voters who can play a key role in his re-election. Biden touts economic policies and attacks Trump on immigration and abortion, seeking to win over wavering voters and gain the consent of groups that supported him in 2020. Donald Trump also continues to travel around the country in search of support and funds. The former president is increasingly making the January 6 attack on the Capitol a cornerstone of his campaign, hailing the rioters as heroes. Recall that the caucuses and primaries began in the United States in January 2024 and will end in the summer. The party congresses, which will officially approve one candidate from each party, will be held from August to September. Candidates' debates during election campaigns usually take place in September and October. The main and decisive stage will be the November vote. Presidential elections are held on the first Tuesday in November. This is the day when voters across the country come to the polls to vote for their presidential candidate. The next presidential election is scheduled for November 5, 2024. At the same time, in the District of Columbia and 43 states, it is possible to vote early in the period from 3 to 51 days. Although there is a popular vote in this presidential election, since the elections are indirect, only the vote of the Electoral College will determine the final winner. The electors will vote on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, exactly 40 days after the day of the popular vote. The electors do not gather together, but vote in their states. After that, a special commission of this Congress counts the votes, and on January 6, the chairman of the Senate announces the final results of the presidential election. These key dates help regulate the step-by-step process of election campaigns, allow voters to evaluate candidates, and make an informed decision on election day. Citizens of the United States can choose different ways to vote. The first, electronic voting. In some states, the possibility of electronic voting for voters is provided. This may include voting through online platforms or using electronic services. Second, face-to-face voting. Face-to-face voting is the most common way of voting in this presidential election. Voters come to a polling station, which is usually located in a certain place, such as a school, a community center, or a government office. At the polling station, the voter is given a ballot paper on which he marks his choice, and then places it in a sealed ballot box or uses an electronic voting machine. Third, voting by mail. Some states provide the option of voting by mail. The voter receives the ballot in his mailbox, fills it out, and sends it back. Voting by mail can be available both in the United States and abroad for Americans who are outside the country. In addition to the above methods, some states may offer other voting options. These can be, for example, workplace voting, early voting when voters can vote before the official election date, as well as voting at U.S. embassies abroad. The specific voting options may vary in each state, as they have relative autonomy in determining electoral procedures within the federal framework and legislation. The main intrigue of these elections is whether Joe Biden will be re-elected for a second term, or Donald Trump will take revenge and become president again. Joe Biden and Donald Trump represent the two main parties of the United States, the Republican and the Democratic. Their programs largely reflect the differences between these political forces. Democrats are traditionally considered left-wing or centrist across the political spectrum. They support the greater role of the state in public policy and the economy, advocate for social transformation, corporate regulation, environmental protection, and support for civil liberties. Democrats tend to show more liberal views on social issues. They advocate for women's abortion rights, the fight for LGBT rights, the introduction of strict control measures on access to firearms, and support migration reform. Republicans usually advocate limiting government intervention in the economy and hold conservative economic views. They support tax cuts, business deregulation, and privatization of state-owned enterprises. defend the unconditional right to own weapons, and advocate for the protection of traditional marriages and family values. In addition, Republicans support increased border controls and a more restrictive approach to immigration policy. If we compare, as an example, some of the positions of Donald Trump and Joe Biden on a number of key issues, we can note the following. Trump recognized the priority of the slogan America First and often used trade sanctions and tariffs to protect American interests. Biden, on the other hand, seeks to cooperate with other countries and maintain open trade, while protecting American jobs. In immigration policy, during his presidency, Trump adhered to a strict policy against illegal immigrants and focused on building a wall on the border with Mexico, while Biden advocates a more humane attitude and positive changes in the immigration system. In healthcare, Trump sought to repeal Obamacare, President Obama's healthcare reform, while Biden is trying to expand the availability of healthcare. International relations. During the Trump presidency, the United States became less active in some international organizations, such as the World Trade Organization or the Paris Climate Agreement. Biden, on the contrary, is trying to bring the United States back to these and other organizations and restore international alliances. Relations with Russia. Biden and Trump have different approaches to relations with Russia, and although both presidents adhere to a hard line, Biden is more explicit in his support for Ukrainian independence and calls for sanctions against the Russian Federation. There are only two real candidates left in the upcoming elections, Joe Biden and Donald Trump.